Hello again. There can be few people in Britain who have not heard of the so-called Rivers of Blood speech made by Enoch Powell in Birmingham on April the 20th, 1968. In it, he warned what he saw as the danger of mass immigration to Britain of people from what is known as the new Commonwealth countries, that is to say India, Pakistan, the Caribbean and some former African possessions. There exists no definitive text of the entire speech, which has left scope for people to distort what was said or simply lie about it. To give one example, left-wing types claim that Powell had said that in 20 years the black man would have the whip hand over the white man. In fact, he was merely quoting one of his constituents, whom he said had said this to him. At the time that he made this speech, Enoch Powell was the Shadow Secretary of State for Defence in opposition leader Edward Heath's shadow cabinet. He was sacked within hours of the speech being reported. The strange thing is, in retrospect, how mild were the concerns which Enoch Powell expressed. He said, for example, "We must be mad, literally mad as a nation, to be permitting the annual inflow of some 50,000 dependents, who are for the most part the material of the future growth of the immigrant-descended population." 50,000? Why, for most of us today, if we could get the figure down to 50,000 a year, it would be like a dream come true. At the moment, it is at least 5 or 6 times that number entering the country each year. He predicted a total transformation to which there is no parallel in the 1,000 years of English history. Anybody think he got that wrong? Powell predicted, too, that we would end up with the same racial problems that the United States was enduring in 1960s. And he was, of course, perfectly correct about that too. Reading what was actually recorded at the time, there was a tape recording of part of the speech, and newspaper reporters took down a lot of it. It's hard to see really what all the fuss was about. He was said to be using provocative language and stirring up hatred, but it's hard to see how. Newspapers called it the Rivers of Blood speech, but of course it was they who were stirring up trouble by inventing such a dramatic title for it. Powell himself said nothing at all about rivers of blood. What he actually said was that "I am filled with foreboding like the Roman. I seem to see the river Tiber foaming with much blood." Another accusation was that he had whipped up racial prejudice by telling the anecdote of somebody in his Wolverhampton constituency who was an old widow living alone as the only white person in a street full of black families. He said that she was being persecuted by her neighbours and that black children pushed dog shit through a letterbox and called her a racist in the street. He was challenged about this story and refused to reveal the identity of the woman because he said that he had no business revealing it. She'd told him her story confidentially. It was widely believed or claimed that he had invented this unfortunate woman just to create mischief, so that he could appeal to racist feelings on the part of his audience. To quote his words, "She worked hard and did well, paid off her mortgage and began to put something by for her old age. Then the immigrants moved in. With growing fear she saw one house after another taken over. She is becoming afraid to go out. Windows are broken. She finds excreta pushed through her letterbox." Her name was actually Drusilla Cotterill, and she lived in Brighton Place in Wolverhampton. It was only after Enoch Powell's death that the name of the woman came to light, and some adults, people of Jamaican origin who had been children at the time, then admitted they had indeed teased the old woman in the street and that excreta was pushed through her letterbox. What can we say in retrospect about the Rivers of Blood speech? Powell was really only doing what any member of parliament might reasonably be expected to do. He was representing the views of his constituents and bringing them to the attention of the world. That's part of a good MP's job. Was he a racist? Nobody who knew him ever thought so. He was a fluent speaker of Urdu, and when asked if he was a racialist, he said that the answer to the question of whether I am a racialist is no, unless perhaps it is to be a racialist in reverse. I regard many of the peoples in India as being superior in many respects, intellectually, for example, and in other respects, to Europeans. This is incidentally a view which I myself hold. I probably mentioned my views on Gujaratis. Anyway, yeah, I can say straight away I agree with Enoch Powell about that. One last instance of how far Enoch Powell was being modest in his predictions may be seen in an interview which he gave in 1977. He said with resignation, "So let it go on until a third of central London, a third of Birmingham, Wolverhampton are coloured." Only a third of London? At the last census it was found that over half the people in London were either foreigners or the families of immigrants. If one can criticise Enoch Powell for anything, it was for being too laid back about immigration and underestimating the true nature of what was coming.